G'day and welcome to the Hunting Connection podcast. My name is Zach Williams and I am your host. Here we'll connect you with hunters, fishers and outdoor enthusiasts from around the globe. This podcast will share hunting and fishing stories including past experiences and tackle the tough hunting stereotypes our community faces. We hope to be a positive influence to those outside the community while also having a laugh along the way. Hope you enjoy the podcast. G'day and welcome to another episode of Hunting Connection podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Mike Arnold from Mike Arnold Outdoors. How you going, mate?
Hey, I love hearing your accent. That's how I'm going. Thank you for having me on, Zach.
Not a problem at all. You're a very interesting guy. Just looking, the people listening can't see the background behind you, but I took a photo of that before the podcast started, and they'll be able to see that when the episode goes live. But just judging by the background there, you've had a very successful and interesting hunting career.
Well, I have. I've been very fortunate, but I love your background too. You don't know how much I'd love to have that one over your head right now, over mine. That's beautiful animals.
Fallow deer are, you've got a cracker there on the wall behind you. We'll have to get you down here. There's a few species that could be added to that background.
There you go. I'd love to.
So, Mike, let's jump right into it. Where'd you start hunting? How did it all start off for you?
So my dad and my older brother, Randy, my last book, I dedicated, I know we'll talk about that later, so I won't go into it right now, but I dedicated to them. They were my mentors growing up. My dad in particular got me into the shooting sports and hunting. I consider my big game hunting, and I'll put that in quotation marks, began when I was 5. I shot my first whitetail deer in West Texas. And the reason I put big game in quotes is that the whitetail deer at that time in Texas, this was back in the early 60s. 1960s, by the way. Don't you tell your listeners I look like it was the 1860s. So 1960s, and I shot this doe. I call her the most unlucky animal, whitetail in West Texas, because I'd missed 4 other deer on this trip. Shot off of my daddy's shoulder. A little 243. I had to crawl the stock. I didn't have long enough arms to actually reach the trigger by having my shoulder on the butt. And she was a real amazing hunt, though, because in the deer camp where we were, everybody found out that this little boy was deerless. Everybody else had gotten a deer of some sort. And they all put down their rifles on the last day, and they put Daddy and me in a ground blind, and they did a drive. No one was allowed to shoot except this little 5-year-old. And to me, that speaks volumes about who hunters are, the community, the caring for the new boy, new girl on the block. But that's where my big game hunting started. She was about probably the size of what we call a jackrabbit over here, because the deer, like I say, were pretty darn small, and they hadn't brought in the big Midwestern whitetails in. So that's where I started. But before that, I'd gone out with my 410 shotgun with Daddy, and we'd rabbit hunted, and we quail hunted, and morning dove, and that sort of thing. And just loved the outdoors. I loved being in them. I loved hiking. I loved, my wife and I, just as an example, spent our honeymoon in the Pecos Wilderness area up in New Mexico, backpacking. I'm not sure I'd recommend that for a young couple as a honeymoon, but hey, it worked. But so I love being outdoors as a biologist, as a scientist, as a professor. That's my job too.
That's amazing. So you said that you shot your first whitetail in Texas. You grew up in Texas?
I did. I grew up in what we call West Texas. If you look at it, was Abilene, Texas, outside. We were in the country on Daddy had a quarter horse farm. So we grew up. I grew up breaking quarter horses because Daddy figured out if he had two sons, there was no reason for him to ever fall off of a horse again. So he let us get let us get pitched off on our heads. But it was a lovely life for my brother and me. We both love being outside. We both are biologists actually by training. So yeah, we grew up. Abilene is right in the center of the state geographically, but ecologically, it's on what we call the dry line. It's on the other side of the dry line. So it's what we call dry land farming, which Australia has too, non-irrigated areas, that sort of thing. So cotton, sorghum, those kinds of fields were around us in our agricultural area. So yeah, I grew up in Texas. So I live in Georgia now. I have since '89, but I grew up in Texas, so I don't have to have a visa to get in like everybody else from the U.S. So
No, that's amazing. I've been would have been close to Abilene. I went and hunted in Mexico across the border there, and we flew into Dallas and
yep.
Went down and drove down to the border and got to see a good chunk of the Texas countryside, driving from Dallas to Houston to the border. So it's pretty cool country down there. It's just amazing.
What did you? I know you're supposed to ask the questions, but what did you hunt in Mexico?
Whitetail. So one of my mates who came over and we got him onto a fallow deer, a red deer, and a sambar over here. He repaid the favor by taking us over to one of the properties he guided on and that he leased. And we went over there and hunted whitetail.
Oh, fantastic. I bet that was wonderful.
Oh, it was amazing. Very fortunate. Got myself a nice little cull buck and a doe and knocked off pigs and javelina and it was just gorgeous place. But it's definitely eye-opening over there. And then what's that town that does the big buck competitions? It's notorious for it. Is it?
I don't know which one in Texas.
Texas.
I need my mate.
I'm trying to think.
Here, he'd be able to spout it out.
But anyway, it was cool going into the gas station there, and they've got all the years of the different winners of the whitetail, typicals and non-typicals, and males and females and kids and everything. It was just amazing. It was definitely eye-opening for a young Aussie kid going over there and seeing all of that stuff.
Oh, lovely.
So you said that you're a biologist by trade. Do you believe that hunting pushed you into that direction to become a biologist?
I do, absolutely. As a part of my growing up, I just spent so much time in the woods behind my parents' house, spent so much time riding horses, hiking around, hunting, fishing, just being outdoors. I realized actually when I went into university that I thought, oh, I'm going to be a doctor, medical doctor. So I was pre-med is what we call it here. And then I realized real early on that I got into a lab situation with a guy that did a lot of field work on mammals. And so I got to go to Arizona. I got to go down into Mexico. I actually spent 10 weeks in South America, on a trip and all this sort of thing over the time. But I realized real early on, I loved the research, but I loved being outside. And also for the pre-med part, I realized I hate being around sick people. So that doesn't make a very good doctor. I want to tell them, just get over it, rub dirt on it, shut up and, quit crying. That's a real bad thing for a medical doctor to do. So I realized that biology is where I needed to be. It was my passion. But putting those together, the hunting and the conservation and realizing in North America, Australia, it doesn't matter where you are, that hunters and people who fish, we're the ones who gladly subsidize, I might add, we're not bitter about it, gladly subsidize conservation. We are the big conservation supporters, and I'm very happy about that. I love the fact that we are. But yeah, the biology then training, I realized also in my biology, I didn't want to be a lab rat. I love doing lab work, and I have I started lab work in 1975, believe it or not, when I was 17-year-old and in university. And so I do like that, and I do genetics. I'm the head of the Department of Genetics at the University of Georgia, but I'm a conservation biologist. And so I get out in the field. I wear chest waders and get out into the Louisiana marshes and swamps. I've done that for 30 years, and gotten really up close and personal with a lot of those darn mozzies that you guys have over there in the Northern Territory. So that was, it was all a combination, but I just love being in the woods. I really do love being in the woods.
That's amazing. What goes into the role of being a biologist doing what you do? So you're out in the field. What is it exactly you're doing?
So for me, what I've done from day one is a mixture of collecting samples from animals. We also work on plants. Collecting samples, what I mean by that is collecting tissue samples. Since I'm a geneticist, or what they call us now is genomicist, it's just a snooty word for it. It makes us sound smarter, I guess. And you collect samples so you can pull DNA out of it, and then we use those DNA samples for various reasons. But it's to diagnose. It's like diagnosing a disease pattern or association or whatever. So I'll give you an example. I was asked to come over to an enormous property, 200 and what do they have now? Probably 250,000 acres in South Africa. And several years ago, the owners asked me to come over, ostensibly because I was a genomicist, but also because I was a person who'd written books on and articles, so many articles on conservation through hunting. And they have black and white rhinos on their properties, very large herds, actually. And they wanted to take genetic samples, and what they wanted them for is and you would be aware of this too, but when you have a captive population or several captive populations like rhinos in South Africa, let's say, then you want to know who's related to whom. Because when you exchange animals to broaden your genetic population, if you will, then you need to know who's related to whom, because they went down to a very small population size, and you don't want to have brother-sister matings or even first cousin matings. You want, because that gives you what's called inbreeding depression. I'm geeking out on you right now, by the way. And so that can lead to some problems for the animals. You can end up with young that have difficulties, physical difficulties. And so they wanted us to come in, dart rhinos, which we did, drop them, pull samples, tail samples, actually. They used the follicles off the tails, and also ear clips and things like that. And then they sent them to a lab, and they said, okay, who's related to whom before we do this exchange? And the other properties were doing the same thing. So that's what I do in my work. It's very applied, but I also study natural populations, and always have. Went down to Suriname in South America for 10 weeks and it sounds a lot more romantic than it was. They would drop us off in an area. We would chop our way in with machetes, and we would set up a camp in the middle of a tropical rainforest, and then we would collect all the mammals in the area. And from that, it's not really an applied science. It was for a museum, Carnegie Museum. We discovered, I don't know how many new species, but I mean, it was a virgin area. And so that also is part of my work. What's out there? What does the diversity of life like out there? When I was in Australia, your listeners don't know, I was there for six years. I was a PhD student and then a research fellow at, it was Australian National University at that time, ANU, and I worked on grasshoppers. So doing the same thing along the East Coast they actually run from Northern Territory all the way down to, lakes in Victoria. Shoot. What's the little town? But anyway, all the way down into Victoria. So, but I'm going to geek out on you all over the place. So I'm going to shush now.
No, look, that's fine. I'm more than happy just shutting my mouth and listening to you go on. It's definitely very, very interesting, and such a cool job. So you're going around taking genetic samples of different species. That's awesome. When it comes to doing your main stuff, just like wildlife in your area, is it, you're looking to see what's moving around from different areas to see the genetic backlog as well and stuff like that?
We are. I've had students work, most of my students in my lab, because it was easier to experiment on plants than it was animals, although I've kept my hand in. Obviously, half of my career has been on animal species of various kinds, but my students have mostly worked on plant species. One who I had to buy a new field vehicle twice because he kept taking field trips all the way from New Mexico, you'd know where that is, just west of Texas, all the way up to Alaska, collecting from birch trees. And I told Joe, you wear out another vehicle on me and I'm going to make you pay for it. But so they've worked on, we study the history too. Where were plants back during glacial maxima and minima? And, we talk about climate change, and my students, I was teaching this semester again, and my undergraduate students asked me, do you quote unquote believe in climate change? That's a big deal over here. Do you believe in climate change? And I said, of course I do. Look at the biogeography, look at the, history and the fossil record, whatever you want to look at. I said, of course I do. I said, we're in the middle of a climate change right now. I said, the politicization of it is ridiculous, I think, in my estimation, as to what causes it. But I said, climate change is the norm. It's not, everybody's running, well, not everybody, but there are a lot of, I shouldn't call them greenies, but anyway, I do anyway. But, because a lot of my friends are greenies at the university, but they're running around with chickens with their heads cut off going, oh my goodness, sky's falling. And I said, well, look, climate change is the norm. It could toggle back in the next 5 years to being frickin' freezing. So I said, we see it all the time moving back and forth. That's why we have different shorelines in the United States. I said, 15,000 years ago, we had a lot of glaciers here or whatever. And so I said, it's normal. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned for those affected by climate change. I'm not saying that we should try to help human populations right now who are suffering from this climate change. What I'm saying is, don't expect climate change to stop. It's not going to. That's the norm. And my biologist friends who are on that side of the political spectrum don't like me hear me saying that. They want me to say, we got to stop driving our cars, and I'm like, well, sorry. It's dangerous to ride a bike at my age.
Yeah, I'm
going to steal you.
We deal with it here in Australia. I'm not sure what news events you keep up here in Australia, but we're very, trying to chase all the green energies. We're clearing paddocks and putting in acres and acres of solar panels and wind farms, and that looks hideous. And I'm sure on a ecology side of things, it's not great for the environment either. But we're just going through a massive algae bloom here in South Australia, and it's devastating our Gulf here just off of Adelaide, and we're having everything from great whites washing up to seals, dolphins, and all the seagrasses dying, and just everything washing up on the beaches dying. And the first thing that the Greens go to is climate change is the issue, rather than the big ass desalination plant we've just been pumping non-stop off of the coast and pumping the brine back into the Gulf.
Wow. Well, the thing about it, I keep track of these Australia because I have a very soft spot in my heart for the place, since both of my kids were born there, and they can go back and I can't without them. They can go back as citizens, darn it. Once again, as hunters, I think, turning it back to that's what I try to, when I'm giving talks or writing about it. The encouraging thing is that we are the ones that are saving and conserving and restoring tens of millions of hectares. I mean, hundreds of millions of hectares around the world. I know you're doing it in Australia because the animals have value, right? If they didn't have any value from hunters, the land would be gone. We'd use it for something else. Humans would use it for something else. We did it here in the U.S. I point out to folks when they're derogatory, say about a third, not Australia, but a third world country, a developing country, and look at what those people are doing, poaching and tearing up the land. And I say, okay, when white people hit when Europeans hit the eastern shore of the U.S., it was virgin territory, huge, endless tracts of forests, hardwoods, all this sort of stuff, whitetail deer, buffalo, bison, east of the Mississippi, elk, everything was here, turkeys. I said by 1900, we had nothing. Whitetail deer were extinct, basically extinct in Texas, but they were extinct in Georgia. They were extinct east of the Mississippi. And not until the 1930s, when we had the Pittman-Robertson Act come in, which excise tax, 11% excise tax on anything hunting, but particularly firearms and ammunition. I said until then, there were no reintroductions of anything. And so I said, don't get after the quote unquote developing countries. We were one, and we did exactly the same thing. We destroyed our environment. So because we needed the protein, I would have done the same thing. I'm not going to let my kids go hungry. So that can be countered by hunting. That is what counters that, because we give those animals so much value. And the locals are like, hey, I'm not going to get rid of all my leopards. Yeah, they're going to eat my goats occasionally, but by golly, I can get, from the community, that leopard over my shoulder there. It's from Namibia, and it's community-owned property, and they got $40,000 US dollars out of that hunt. Most of it went straight into the community. So they're like, it can eat a few goats. It's really okay. Our goats don't cost that much. It can feed on my goats a little bit, but we give it value. Or they would have poisoned that male leopard. They would have gotten rid of the cubs. They would have killed everything, because they were doing that because they were losing money by having leopards around. All of a sudden, they're making buku bucks, is what we say. So,
yeah, look, the whole US conservation story is like I drive a truck for a living. I deliver building materials, so I've constantly got stuff like Meat Eater on in the background as I'm doing my runs. So I've had a good history lesson from Steve Ranella and all the other podcasts associated to it. So just listing how they brought all these animals back from the brink of extinction, and the Pittman-Robertson Act, and what's the fishing one? I always forget that. The Dingle
Oh,
Dingle
shoot.
Johnson? No.
Yes,
Dingle
thank you.
Johnson?
Thank you. Dingle Johnson. Yeah. I don't fish. Isn't that terrible? One of my buddies said, "Hey, you never mentioned the Dingle Johnson." I said, "Well, I wrote about it in my new book." I said, "But I can't remember the darn name because I don't fish."
I just think both of those programs are amazing. We've got a government tax here, the GST, and if we could take that off of outdoor recreation equipment, guns, ammo, just any of the camping stores, fishing stores, and put a tax in that goes towards the land and the wildlife here, it would be amazing. Australia is very similar to Texas with what's going on with introduced, as Texans call exotic animals. We call introduced and feral species. So we've got 28 different, game species that we hunt, everything from rabbits, cats, dogs, foxes, to the 6 deer species. And, we're having huge issues here at the moment with the balance of hunting and eradication from the government. So we're having helicopter colours go through, bullying, farm owners, saying, "Hey, we flew over your property with thermal cameras. We counted this many deer. If you don't let us shoot them on your property, we're going to start fining you for every deer on that property." So they're trying to go for total eradication when it comes to the 6 species of deer. They're looking at poisoning. They've just done a massive study here in South Australia on poisoning deer with a substance similar to 1080, but apparently it's just in a little controlled feeder that only the deer can get into. A plate on the floor that kangaroos and emus can't set off. The kangaroos and emus stand on the plate, and that closes the feeder, where the deer their hooves go through the plate, and they can get to the grain. And apparently it's 95 to 100% effective, and they had to downgrade the poison because the deer were dying before they left the feeder, and it was too effective for them to use. So we're battling with stuff like that down here at the moment. And we're trying to, as hunters, because we want this valuable resource. Like you said, we see it as a valuable resource. We want to be able to, hunt it, feed our families. We don't want to, end up going out and finding poisoned deer on the properties that we hunt, or as we're finding, helicopter culled deer just left there rotting, similar to what you do with the pigs in Texas, but they don't go and collect them. It's just shoot them and leave them. So yeah, we got a massive battle with our conservation departments and our biologists. They've started an invasive species council where they're targeting this type of thing, and they're putting out all this information of how destructive the animals are, and pushing a narrative for total eradication. It's crazy.
Well, and I wonder, because one of the things I was struck with in Europe is the appreciation and the drive for hunting and conservation and restoration through hunting by non-hunters because of their appreciation for game meat and for the fact that it is so much healthier. It is so much more ethical to have it, raised in nature. They see it as an ethical way of harvesting. If they're going to eat meat, harvesting that meat. And also, of course, such a small carbon footprint to have the animals there, as opposed to, and before I say this, I'm from a ranching background, so I have nothing against ranchers per se, but it is a very tiny carbon footprint to have animals such as even introduced deer, as you know. I'm preaching to the choir here, but to have them there as opposed to a cattle or a sheep ranch or farm. And so the Europeans are amazing because they will pay big bucks for game meat because there's no chemicals. There's, you name it. It is the perfect meat for them and prepared well. It's so much to them. It tastes so much better than beef or lamb or whatever. I'm not going to argue that point because I love my beef and lamb. However, the fact of the matter is, I wonder, why that's not taking off in Australia as well. Hey, guys and gals, I mean, you need to understand that game meat's the way to go.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because we've got millions and millions of feral goats here, and around 2008 2009 they started using them as a resource and rounding them up, sending them to an abattoir, and sending them to the shops here and deporting them to Saudi Arabia and a lot of those other Muslim countries and that are big on goat meat. So we were making really good money. They were getting, farmers were getting $10 to $12 a live kilo from the goats, and they're rounding up 1,000 at a time and sending them on a truck. So they're making everything they were losing from droughts and floods and fires and everything else that they're dealing with. They've got this free money coming out onto their farms. So we started doing that and we're doing really well, but now it's dropped down below. I think I seen today it's about $1.60 a live kilo for these goats. So farmers aren't seeing them as valuable now because they're not making as much money off of them. The money that they're getting from them, they're burning on diesel, rounding them up. And we've got a kangaroo harvesting program, resource where people go out at night shooting kangaroos, harvesting them for human consumption, meat and leather. But in recent years, we've had some mega anti-hunter, vegan types actually pushing towards people like Nike and Adidas to stop using kangaroo leather in their shoes. So we've just had a massive market crash in all of that because we can't sell the leather overseas anymore. And, states like California and a bunch of European countries have actually banned the import of kangaroo materials into the country because they're fed this false narrative from these anti-hunting greenie mobs that kangaroos are an endangered species and they're on the brink of extinction, where there's more kangaroos in Australia than there was pre-white settlement.
Yeah, I started to say they haven't been out to the west, have they?
They haven't left the city.
For that matter. Oh.
So yeah, it's just it's a crazy thing. Pigs for years have been rounded up and shot and dogged and taken to chillers for human consumption and like pet food. So there is small industries for it. The venison trade has slowly snuck into supermarkets, and there's a few supermarkets here that sell wild venison and wild boar, but it's nowhere near what it should be with the numbers of animals we have here. But then you've got the governments wanting to poison and introduce disease. Like, I know it's probably not a good thing to say because I know that one of the people from the Invasive Species Council actually listens to the podcast, but it wouldn't surprise me if they started releasing CWD and other cervid diseases here in Australia to try and eradicate them, which would be just horrible.
Yeah, that would be, the history behind, not just in Australia, but the history behind releasing diseases as a control mechanism or releasing whatever as a control mechanism tends to backfire on us more often than not. As a biologist, I mean, I am saying that, we find that we don't understand that web of life very well when we miss a link and then we go, oh shoot, look what we've done, because we start ripping it apart by introducing something. So I would hope they would not do that.
Well, unfortunately they have with the rabbit. They've released calicivirus and myxomatosis, so they'll go through waves here. The populations will get up and then Mixie or Calici will get through them and wipe them down. And at the moment, they're toying with releasing a carp herpes virus here in Australia for the European carp, which you're very similar to the common carp that you guys have over there, which I personally think would be catastrophic to our native ecosystems. You get a disease like a virus that wipes out 60-70% of the carp populations in the waterways. It's going to lead to massive blackwater events, and we don't know what that's going to look like, and they're very adamant and very hard, like pushing it very hard to release here. So Australia just does not learn when it comes to this thing.
Well, no, it's not just Aussies, okay? We have a really bad history of this in the United States. So don't think you're running ahead of us by being dumb. We we really seriously, and I don't know, it's usually scientists and biologists like me, so I can pick on us who come up with these brainstorms of, wow, this is going to solve everything, and this is a silver bullet, and then darn it, backfires, it blows up in our face like an IED, and then we go, oh, I didn't see that coming, and then normally we blame somebody else. Scientists blame somebody else. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. No, I wasn't for that, sort of thing. But getting back to it, yeah, I think that, the transfer of species is something that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. I'm sure the Maoris brought some stuff in when they shipped in, right? So we know they did. Or the Hawaiians, or whoever it was. So we can look back in, and I know the Romans were transporting things. I know we transported stuff, Europeans, over to the U.S. This kind of exchange, biological exchange through humans, once again, is a norm. Is it good? Well, sometimes it doesn't really have that big of an impact biologically. Sometimes it does, and we have to take each case, I think, on its own, and then try to understand, okay, what exactly is going on here. One of our famous boo-boos was bringing in what's called a nutria. So to try to control water hyacinth in Louisiana, and the Louisiana farmers are so pleased that we did this. Now those nutria are all over the place. They're like a beaver with a rat's tail. You probably know what they are. And we brought them in, and the darn things escaped during a hurricane, and now they're cutting down trees up and down all the way into Texas. We had them in West Texas, where it's real dry, but they were in stream beds there. So, we introduced them to control water hyacinth. How did that work out for us? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's wacky, the things that we've done to try and control things, like the famous story here with the cane beetle and the cane toad, and but the way America deals with exotic species, like you've got the Sika deer in Maryland, you've got ibex in New Mexico, you've got gemsbok in New Mexico, you've got samba deer in Florida off an island. And there's a few other species that can't come to mind at the moment. Texas is full of them. Axis deer and eland, like the beautiful bull above your shoulder there. The way you guys deal with it seems to be a better way. Like how they have a tag system for the exotics, and it helps a bit. Here we've got free range for most things apart from our hog deer. They have a short season and 4-week-long season here in Victoria, and then there's also a ballot system for 3 areas to hunt, which is really, really cool to do. If you haven't looked into it, the Blonde Bay Snake Island advisory group, they do a ballot every year. It's just been drawn. I drew it 2.5-3 years ago, and it is such a cool hunt. Have you hunted hog deer?
No. Yes and no. I've hunted muntjac and something close to it, and Chinese water deer in England, believe it or not. So, but not in Australia. No, I haven't hunted the hog deer there. But I'd love to do that.
So yeah, I'll have to send you the links to that, because we were talking before how you love your smaller species of mammals to hunt. You know, you've got a bunch of beautiful duiker and that in the background there. So yeah, we have a really great conservation story with the hog deer. We've pretty much only got the only free range huntable population in the world, which is pretty incredible. And we've got a really great group that, you know, does the tag system so that we can control the numbers. They do some thermal culling on them, which is unfortunate, because there's only about 3,000-ish in the area that they're in. But yeah, it's a cool story. And they when you take one, they take sizes, they take DNA samples, they take the jaw, just to see what the population health is like and other things that they can pick up on it. And, you know, they eventually might start exporting them back over to Indo-Asia, the areas that they're from, which would be really cool. Which is a great success story. You know, I know that a few of the hog deer down there do have chittle DNA through them too, because chittle and, or as you guys call axis, sorry, but they can interbreed. So the hog deer do have that chittle DNA in them as well. But yeah, that's probably the pinnacle of that kind of conservation we have here in Australia, where everything else, it's 365 days a year, 24/7. If you've got private property, you can go on there with thermals, spotlights, whatever you want for control, with consent with the property owner that you're hunting on, which is, yeah, it's good, because we've always got a freezer full of meat and constantly giving it away. But it's just one of those battles where you have to work, you know, because it's if you want big heads, you have to control the herds and be picky, but you also want to keep the property owners happy by taking as many of the animals off of the landscape as possible. So it's a constant internal battle.
Well, there is a balance, right? I mean, I saw that we were in Scotland, came back a couple of weeks ago, I guess. Now I'm losing track of time. And we hunted red deer, and we hunted sika, introduced sika, and we hunted roebuck. And the roebuck and red deer, of course, are native to there and to this Scottish Highlands, but the sika deer are not. But all three, the timber owners there, mostly spruce is what they're growing there for use in construction, paper, everything. But it's a billion pound, 1.5 billion pounds a year, I guess, industry. And so those timber owners want the deer off of there because they love to eat the seedlings that they're planting. But there's this balance, right? Because once again, you have a game meat market there, both and it's interesting, they use everything and it's not just the meat. They get chew toys off of the legs and everything else for dogs. They use it for dog food, their grind, but it's actually so good that a lot of humans come in and buy their dog, quote unquote, dog food mints to use at home, even though they can get the human mints, quote unquote, which is out of the deer as well. So they have this balance, though. They want to keep the deer around for the other industries, but they want to keep them down to a number where they're not destructive on the forestry. And it was, I did a lot of interviews while I was there with these folks, and it's a fascinating dance that they do, that we all do, right? I mean, we're trying to do the same thing with whitetail deer in Georgia. I said they were extinct up until 1930. Now we have, I don't know what the last census was, 1.8 million in the confines of our state. That's a lot of whitetail deer. I hit one the other day. You don't want to do that. that. And so, so we're constantly, right? Okay, how do we control as hunters? Because hunting is the way to control. Poisoning is not the way to control, all right? That is indiscriminate. It gets into water sources. It gets into everything. You don't want to do that. I'm sorry for those who are listening to this podcast and believe that's what you ought to do with your animals over there. But that is as a biologist, I can tell you that is a terrible idea to do with anything. Poisoning is a bad idea because it gets into too many sources that can affect humans, if nothing else. But, how do we control it through hunting? And how do we do that? And we have the same problem with anti-hunters here. Oh, you shouldn't hunt. And then they hit a white-tailed deer in their car. I heard one of my friends who's anti-hunting, and they smashed their car up with a white-tailed deer, and they said, maybe I am for hunting. And I said, they have to be controlled. And the best way to do it is to hunt, harvest the meat, get it into the system, give it to food banks. If that's what we want to do, that's great. But, we have a lot of hungry people here. Let's get it to them. And so it's, once again, I'm preaching to the choir, but there's a lot of positive associated with hunting that people are, as they read articles or books and listen to podcasts like yours, they're going, oh, I never thought about that. I think most people who don't hunt are not anti-hunters. I believe it's a bell-shaped curve over here in the U.S., and I bet it is in Australia, where that central part, I'm a scientist, obviously, talking about a bell-shaped curve, but that central portion, that big lump in the middle, I think they're non-hunters who don't know what the benefits are from hunting, right? And what all of the benefits are from game meat, what all the benefits are from controlling populations, modulating how many males and females and their impact on the environment. I just don't think they know. I don't think they're against it. I think they hear that against that anti-hunting message sometimes and go, oh, okay, and maybe buy into it. But I think mostly they just haven't been informed that hunters, I'm going to blame us, that I have not informed them well enough. I have not educated them well enough and explained to them as a biologist, but also mainly as a hunter, here are the benefits. Because when my wife's a non-hunter, she's not anti-hunter, she never has been, but Frances didn't know, and I'd been married, we've been married a long time until I wrote my first book on this, and she read it. She said, honey, I didn't know this. I didn't know that this is the reconstruction of areas, the resurrection of habitats, and the community benefit, human community benefit. She said, I didn't know any of this. And I said, well, that's my fault. I hadn't, you're my wife and I haven't told you. That's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's funny. Here in Australia, we've had this hunting culture for many years where hunters don't want to be seen. If they're not seen, they're not spoken about, so they're out of the public eye. And since social media, it's changed a bit. People posting grip and grins. There's been a few instances where hunters are blown up shooting certain species, myself included, shooting feral cats down here in Australia a few years back. It made worldwide headlines, which can give a negative effect when people were just seeing the photo of me holding a bow and a red and white cat in the middle of the bush. It can look bad until you start speaking to people and go, hey, this cat's probably killed 50, 60 native animals this week, from birds, lizards, small marsupials and mammals. And then once you start explaining that stuff, they're like, okay, I didn't think about that. Shoot every cat now. But
Yep.
we've had this thing where hunters have just kind of kept themselves in the dark so that they're not being seen. And then, since we've had influencers like Stephen Ranella, who is a massive identity here in Australia for his, in the hunting community, general people wouldn't know who he is, but that whole mentality of conservation and using meat to show non-hunters what we do. It's blown up here. We've got a bunch of hunter chefs here now, and they're releasing amazing cookbooks and all of this other stuff. We're having small, Australia's only got 25 million people. It's continentally the size of the US, but with a population smaller than LA. So, we're slowly ticking off some stuff. We're having like little public hunting expos where public can just walk in off the street, and we're serving venison and stuff like that, which is amazing for people who have never really experienced anything to do with hunting. They're coming in and they're trying, venison burgers, and they can buy mints and stuff from these stalls, and it's opening their eyes. They're like, oh, we've got this resource. So it's slowly getting out there for the general people. But at the same time, we have these animal rights people that, every duck season, they're going out to the wetlands, they're filming hunters, they're getting in duck hunters' faces, they're tormenting them, they're letting air out of tires, they're smearing human feces over cars, just to try and deter hunters from the wetlands. And we don't have anti-hunting laws, so where hunter harassment laws, sorry, where people that come in, they're back there the next year in the wetlands harassing the hunters, and it's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is. That aspect of the militant anti-hunters. Well, we have it here in the U.S., but not like you say, in Australia or even in Europe. The population sizes allow sort of a concentration, if you will, a distillation of the anti-hunters, as you know better than me. Distillation where they know exactly where things are going to happen, and so they can be there. Events like opening day of waterfowl hunting or whatever it happens to be. So it's a sad situation, and I think that the way to, here in the U.S., the way to impact anti-hunting, and in Europe and that sort of thing, anywhere in the world, is through education of the non-hunters, not the anti-hunters. We're not going to probably make any inroads there, but with the non-hunters, and it affects votes here in the U.S. It affects all sorts of different things in Europe as well, and I'm sure it does in Australia, or can.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely can when it comes, we see it watching the States with the ballot box biology, when it especially comes to charismatic megafauna like bears and stuff like that. We have the same here with kangaroos. There's constantly, like I was saying before, these people constantly trying to get kangaroo hunting, and there's not. You can't really hunt a kangaroo. It's as amazing as it sounds for non-Australians. It's purely pest control because the numbers are that high.
Yep.
Way worse than any of the deer species here. They're destroying fences and crops, and we have. I believe personally, it's an outdated system. With dealing with them, especially on private property when you're not doing commercial stuff. There's a bunch of different tags and regulations. Most of the tags are opposite to what you guys would have in the States, where you can only shoot them and leave them. You have to shoot them, head shoot them, and leave them on the spot. You're not allowed to take any of the meat from them. You just have to leave them there to rot. Wow. And that blows a lot of Americans' minds when it comes to that. And the hardest tag to get is the tag that you can actually take the meat away from. So,
well, and the thing about it is that the counterintuitive nature of anti-hunting that comes into situations like that, or to control. If you take, there is a problem, I think, here of a balance, that we're out of balance here in the U.S., where we're not allowed to sell game meat. Now, a lot of my hunter friends, in other words, we can't take one into the butcher and say, like they can in Europe, to certain abattoirs or butchers and have them pay us for it. Now, the history in the U.S. was market hunting, and there's a good reason why, it was set up so that we couldn't do that, because that's why we wiped out everything. It was basically poaching, but we would go out and raft shoot ducks at night with punt guns, on our canoes or whatever the heck it was, filled with nails and glass and everything else, to just wipe out the whole squad of ducks that were sitting out there on the water for the night, or passenger pigeons, or whitetail deer, whatever it happens to be, or bison, of course. But now I believe we could put some logical laws into effect where we could actually begin to really have an impact and have a game meat market here. We do have some, okay? I'm not saying we don't have some game meat purveyors here, but what I'm really saying is that somebody who knocks a moose over in Maine should be able to run it in to wherever. I happen to love moose meat, by the way, and ought to be able to sell it to someone who is licensed to do that. Just like they can in Europe. And the game meat, I will just tell you, would probably be more expensive than beef or whatever that we put into a stockyard, what we call a stockyard or whatever, to fatten up. It is going to be more expensive because it's not as industrialized, but we need to have that here, I believe. Now, I will tell you that a lot of the hunting organizations, when I say that, my buddies there go, "You're just wrong. Don't you know what happened with us? That's why we have these great game laws." And I'm like, look, I understand, but you got to evolve with the system. We also have 1.8 million whitetail deer in this darn state, and we don't need that many. We need to balance this somehow. We need to give there an impetus and a value to these whitetail deer to someone who takes them. We had a deer a day season one year. I could shoot one whitetail deer for like 60 days. I don't know. Who has a freezer? I mean, none of us are, going to shoot 60 whitetail deer. You can't, it would overflow the system of hunters for the hungry even. So, let's be reasonable and logical and have a system that is, determined by logical laws. We don't want to wipe out all the whitetail again, but we could really reduce the population if we gave them value for someone to go out and shoot a deer a day. Put in a couple of seasons that were a deer a day and say, when you harvest this, you can take it to this person. They will pay you this amount of money. I bet you any amount of money we would be able to reduce the whitetail deer down to a certain level. Then we would make the law, okay, now you're back to a buck and 2 does a year. And, you can sell them if you want to, but you're now back to, so anyway, but when I say that, I give talks on this and they look at me, even my hunter buddies especially are like, "What is wrong with you? You sound like a, whatever." And I'm sorry. I said, "Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to poison them. I want to hunt them."
Nah, that's completely understandable. And like we said, poisoning's absolutely. So, let's jump into the books you have. You've just had a new book released, and you've got a couple of others as well, or what is it? Your third or fourth?
Well, so it depends on how you count them. This was, in the grand scheme of things, the book that came out in June of this year was my 6th book. The first 4 books were science texts for Oxford University Press that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy if they weren't in the field, because they are really sleep aids. I love doing them. But the last two are what I refer to as my storytelling books and conservation through hunting books. I'm working on a new one, so that's why I say it depends on how we count. But the first book that really blended together the conservation through hunting was Bringing Back the Lions. It came out in 22, and it was based around the stories and the story I told about a hunting concession in Mozambique called Catada 11, controlled by Zambezi Delta Safaris, run by Mark Haldane. He's a hero in our field, and one of the editors who told me, book editors in the hunting realm, said, Mike, when I started to write this, he said, you're not a big enough writing name to write this. This guy is a rock star. So Mark's a rock star. Fortunately, Mark gave me the chance to write about his operation, but we called it Bringing Back the Lions because it was centered around in this area of Catada 11. Catada is a Portuguese word for hunting concession because it was a Portuguese colony. And so the Catada 11 story was one from rags to riches. And I told this in terms of biology, but also in terms of the human condition there. And it all had to do with hunting. It all had to do with Mark Haldane and Carlos Faria, his partner, coming in after the Civil War there and resurrecting this area through bringing international hunters in who paid for conservation and for uplifting the human population there to where the human population now in that area, the local saying of villagers, have a middle class. They don't die of malaria. They don't die of what's called kwashiorkor, which is protein deficiency because they're feeding off of the game meat and this sort of thing. So that was my first book, Bringing Back the Lions. And the lions part of it was the Cabela Family Foundation and Mary Cabela in particular, who Frances, my wife, and I got to know real well. She was a delightful woman. She passed away recently. But Mary funded the reintroduction of lions, believe it or not, to this area. She also, and Cabela Family Foundation, funded the reintroduction of cheetahs. The cheetahs will never be hunted. The lions will eventually be hunted. They started with 24 lions. They now have over 100, and it's different prides. But they wanted apex predators there. Their vision was not to immediately hunt them or anything like that necessarily, although the lions, like I say, will be hunted, and that money will be brought back in for conservation work and for the local folks. But they brought them in because they believed that putting the habitat back together was what their goals should be, their mission should be, their heritage should be. Similarly, the book that came out this year, it's called Bringing Back the Wild, to connect it to Bringing Back the Lions, according to my book agent. And I like the title, actually. But Bringing Back the Wild is quite a bit different. It has some more information about Catada 11 in one of the chapters, but it actually covers hunts and interviews that I've done with folks who are associated with the hunting industry, various places. So North America, British Columbia, Oklahoma, the Yucatan Peninsula, where I was, and looking at the conservation through hunting there and doing some hunting, but also Sweden, England, various places in Africa. So just all over the place that way. And it tells the stories of these people involved in the hunting industry and the impact they've made on restoring habitats as well as benefiting their local communities wherever they are. So in Europe, that would be contributing to the game meat industry for the most part, okay, because Europeans are in developed countries, and so they don't need so much financial input, although the financial input protects the land, because landowners won't go out and rip up all the copses there. They will leave them for things like they have access to, or fallow stacks, or whatever the heck it is they have on their properties, the roebuck and this sort of thing. They won't tear up the environment. They won't tear up all of the environment. They'll put in hedgerows so that the bird hunting is there. So the money affects the conservation, but then the follow-on from that is this game meat market. But in the Yucatan Peninsula, on the other hand, the money that comes in there hires the locals from the local, in this case, Mayan ancestors, and they protect the environment. They don't tear up the environment. They don't farm the environment because they have the finances coming in. And also those birds you can see over my shoulders, they love that meat. I didn't get to eat those. That was really frustrating. I did get to eat one of the deer that I got, I might add. They had what they call a pibille, which y'all do the same thing, cooking in the ground in Australia and certain places, but especially in New Zealand, they do it. But anyway, so it's different stories, but it still shows the impact that's bringing back to wild, this last book that came out in June. It shows the stories of how hunting contributes and is a main driver in most places for conserving habitats and improving the lives of humans, the local human populations, whether it's Europeans eating better, healthier meat, or whether it's my Mexican friends, my friends who actually have jobs, they actually have food on the table for their kids and that sort of thing because of the money I paid for the most part. So that's what those two books are about. And the third one that I'm working on, I had so much material that I could not use. Publishers always say, Mike, this is how many words you can say. And this book, I don't know why they emphasize that for some reason, Zach, especially with me. What did my Aussie friend, I got to stop for a second. One of my best buds in Australia when we were there the 6 years, towards the end, when Francis and I were about to have to move back to the U.S., and I emphasized that we had to move back, we thought we were going to stay in Australia for the rest of our lives, but then personal things with our parents came up. But anyway, so one of my Aussie friends said, Mike, we have a saying here in Australia that Australians can talk underwater. He said, I am now convinced that Yanks can talk under wet cement. That was hurtful, but anyway, but true. So anyway, I had so much material that I would have loved to have put into Bringing Back the Wild, so many more stories, so many more exciting and success stories, if you will. So that's what I'm working on now for this next book. I have it, it's in the planning stages. I have a lot of the chapters already planned out. It's a disease, is what I tell people. Writing books is a disease, and I've got that disease.
That's awesome. How long does it take you from start to finish when you first come up with the idea to write a book to when it's out being published? What's the time frame there?
Well, it depends on the kind of book. Those first 4 books for Oxford University Press, I would say that actually it varies. About a year and a half, I would say. The books, these last 2 books, Bringing Back the Lions and Bringing Back the Wild, took 2 years each. But it wasn't the writing. It was the collecting the information, the material. Bringing Back the Lions, the very first one, should have come out a year earlier. But we had COVID. And so in retrospect, it was fine, but I was supposed to be in Mozambique in 20, and of course that fell apart. But I did end up in Namibia on a really rather inexpensive leopard hunt because they were starved for cash, and it was the only African country I could get into. So I'm not really complaining about that. But so it took 2 years, but it would have come out a little bit faster. But bring back to wild, we had to go to a lot of places, and I'm not complaining about any of that. But we went to a lot of places I say we, Frances and I, she's my photographer, videographer, even though she's a non-hunter, she loves the adventures. But we had to go to a lot of places and get the material. We needed to interview folks. We needed to interview the Takla youth in the First Nation people up in British Columbia, and go out fishing with the grandmother, and and it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful, but it takes time. And so I would say this next one will be the same. I paid for it already, believe it or not, with the publisher. So that's all set up, but it'll probably, it's better for books. You sort of don't want to publish them, for example, every year, because it's a strategy for the book publishers and your agents. Then your next one sort of walks on the last one, if that makes sense, for their marketing and that sort of thing. I'd write one a year if I could, because like I say, it's a disease. But and I write a lot of magazine articles, obviously, for places like Sports Afield and Australian Hunter and that sort of thing. And so I love magazine article writing as well, but you shouldn't really, as a book author, you probably, unless you're writing novels, I guess, but these kinds of nonfiction is probably better to have them come out about every 2 years.
That's amazing. So with the first book, with the lion stuff, like how you spoke to the guy that's running the stuff down there, and you've obviously gone. Did you go down there as well to research why you were doing the book?
Oh yeah, Frances and I spent months there. We're actually going back to Katata 11 for an update on the cats. And honestly, we're going back for an update on everything. They're doing a rewilding. Oh, hunters don't like the term rewilding, at least in the U.S. The other day I said rewilding as a biologist, and they went, "Oh, that's a terrible word," And I said, we need to take that word back as the hunters, instead of letting the anti-hunters have that word. I said, they've just stolen it from us. But anyway, the reintroduction of the lions and all, but they've also reintroduced elephants there that are not on permit. They took in 6 teenage bulls the other day that had been causing trouble, so they take in the problem kids too into this Katata. But they also have been reintroducing pangolins that the government confiscates from poachers in meat markets. Obviously, they're still alive, and so we're going to do an update next June. We're going back, I guess. We'll be there for a good long while. I'm hunting a reed buck, I think, and I'll hunt for meat for the camp, but that's all the hunting I'll do. So we've spent a lot of time in Katata 11. We consider it our second home, actually, over there in Africa. But we went there twice in 21. Well, like I say, we were supposed to go twice in 20, but the country was closed. But we went twice in 21, and then more right before the book came out, just to tidy things up. But yeah, we absolutely spent a good bit of time there, and we will continue to. We really will. It's the most game rich. I tell people this. You can tell it's a favorite. I love all the places I get to go, but Katata 11 is the most game rich place I've ever seen in my life, in terms of numbers and in terms of biodiversity of game, but also of song. I mean, it is a favorite place for birders to go because there are these very rare species. Why are they there? Because hunters are funding the anti-poaching, which are both wood and meat poachers. So the birds are there because of hunters. And so they bring in birding groups that are not hunting after the season is over, like in late November, I guess it is, almost now, right now. They'll bring in birding groups, and they're there to see things like the pitta and all this that are never seen anywhere else. And it's because, once again, the songbirds, the bird, I love birds. That's why I loved Australia. So I'm sure there's a cocky on your roof right now ripping your tiles off, but I thought it was so cool. So, but anyway, sorry guys who are listening to this right now trying to shoot the cockies off your roof. But the thing about it is, all of this habitat is unfenced. And yet it is the most game-rich place I've ever seen in my life, literally the most game-rich place on all the different metrics that a biologist would use. It's just fabulous. But see, we have those kinds of game-rich areas all over the world for the exact same reason, because of hunters.
That's awesome. Yeah, I haven't been to Africa yet. It's definitely on the list for one day. I gotta find a better job and earn more money before I can go over there. Unfortunately, it's for now it's out of my price range, especially with a young family. But yeah,
I didn't go when my kids were young either. Just to tell you, they had to get out of the what we say here is off the trough. They had to get out of our house and be off of my insurance before I could actually start investing in a lot of these trips.
I need to start charging them board so I can afford to go. They're only 5 and 11, so.
Hey, they're old enough to get a job.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, Africa is definitely it's funny, like like I said, hunting hasn't always been it's been a part of the culture here, but it's not like the quote unquote trophy hunting side of things hasn't always been a part of it. But I remember being, 5, 6 years old with my pop who taught me how to hunt. And I'd be like, one day we're going to go hunt Africa together. Being a 5, 6-year-old kid talking about, kids are playing football over here and cricket, and there's me talking about hunting trips and wanting to go hunt stuff in Africa. I was just looked at as a strange kid. Well, I still am looked at as a strange man, but but yeah, it's Africa's.
I was reading Robert Ruark when I was 5 or 6 years old and dreaming of doing a leopard hunt, and I never thought I'd be able to do it. So just keep your dreams alive. You'll be amazed. You'll get over there one day.
Yeah, no, I know I'll get over there one day. It's a cool place. But yeah, the success story, like I've got a big painting of a bunch of African elephants right above the laptop right now that I was gifted earlier this year from a fella that used to run the Australian Bow Hunting Museum here in Bathurst in New South Wales, but he's a magnificent painter, and he's kept a well-documented thing of every bow hunting archery achievement that's happened in Australia. He's got just books and books that he's put together on it. It's incredible. Ian Fenton is his name, but yeah, it's spectacular. But yeah, just staring at the painting of the African elephants, I'm like, oh man, I would love to get over there, But yeah, just hearing how, especially over COVID, like, you said a few words there. You said stuff like, the early 2020s when it was all kicking off. You said pangolin, which was, the original thing that they said was caused it all over there. But yeah, you hear about how the certain areas over COVID, the animals just went, like the numbers just went down because they didn't have the tourists over there bringing in the money, and they didn't have the hunters over there, and the guides had to go back into poaching to bring meat for their families. So it's just cool seeing like the countries over in Africa that have well-regulated hunting. And, you know, I've spoken to a few different people that guide over there, and some people that are actually from there who have moved over to Australia, and their families have farms. And yeah, it's incredible to hear how it all works. And people, when you speak to the everyday person, they just see, you know, Cecil the lion there with old mate the dentist, and you know they're freaking out. But then when you start explaining everything that you've covered, the meat going back into the communities, the money that's generated from them, the farmlands, you know, the farmers aren't going out there and killing every elephant that runs through their crops, because they know that they're seeing price tags and meat that's coming off of it from international hunters coming over and chasing it. So yeah, it is just an absolutely incredible story.
It is, and you know, to use the leopard as an example, that area in Kwakalan in Namibia, it's when we went into it, I talked to people there, and I interviewed folks, and then I read articles, and this area that we were in, this huge concession, it was community, and Namibia is community based, so the local communities own the land from the government. And then they lease it out. The local communities, the local villagers lease it out to the outfitters. So they were being interviewed by an anti-hunter, actually. He came in, or she came in, I can't remember if it was a he or she, and it was a Namibian interviewer from a newspaper, and they asked them, why are you letting these white hunters come in and shoot our animals, you know, kill our animals? And the local, you know, black Namibians, the villagers said that it was the head person there, the mayor, or whatever you want to call it. He said, okay, let me tell you why. He said, I can sell a cow that is going to eat up all of this vegetation over here. It'll decimate, or a goat. I can sell them, say, for 50 of our units of money. He said a hunter comes in here and shoots one leopard or one kudu or one giraffe or one eland, and they will pay me up to 40,000 of our units. He said, what do you think would be better? Because the native animals are not going to decimate this area like my goats and cattle do. And yet also it helps the environment. He said it helps the environment, but he said it also brings in money that we can then help our children with medical or with school, and our families are fed and all this. And that kind of intuition and that kind of knowledge and wisdom is what is there. These people are not dumb. They are not, you know, they may not have the education levels of a PhD, which here it's called piled higher and deeper. I have one of those. And so the thing about it is, you know, they may not have that educational level, but they are very, very smart. They're cluey people. And they understand that they don't want to destroy their homeland, their habitats around them. And if they can bring this money in that way and not have to farm, not have to bring in goats that destroy everything, you know, and they understand how this works, but they will bring the goats in if the hunters aren't there, because they have to feed their families. But they also realize the economic benefits. And I thought it was one of the most amazing, intuitive, smart answers. I've never heard an anti-hunter be as smart as this guy was, who was not an anti-hunter. He was a member of the community, and he said, this is what is good for the environment around us and for the people. Now, why are you against it? I mean, he was, you know, sort of in their face, and being a local, you know, I could give that argument and they could go, yeah, well, you're just a white guy who wants to kill our animals. But the local being able to say that, and you see Botswana, you see their president saying to the the English, the German, the French. Okay, fine. I'm going to ship 10,000 of our elephants to you and you find homes for them. It's like, you want them not to be shot, not to be culled, the meat not to be used. That's fine. There you go. I'm going to ship you 10,000 of them. I'll pay for it. I'll get them to you, and then you do what you want with them. Have them in your cities, or So anyway, I think that what anti-hunters, and non-hunters too, don't understand is that it's not a balance. It's not a way. There's not a way of balancing nature when everything is disturbed. And what I mean by that is there's not a habitat anywhere on this planet that is not disturbed, period, because of humans. But there's also climate change. We talked about it earlier. That's always going to continue, and we have to balance. We as humans need to be good stewards and balance this natural order that's around us, period. That's just what we have to do. And if we can't just say, oh, we're going to leave it alone and let it. Well, we can, but then we'll see the devastation that wreaks. Anyway, I'm once again preaching to the choir, but it is a good message, a positive message that we can give as hunters. That's what I would encourage us with.
No, that's exactly right. How do you feel that trophy bans that certain countries have in place? Australia's banned the import of, stuff like lions and elephants, stuff like that, so you can't bring it back into the country. And I know the States has a list of animals that you can't bring back into the States. How do you think that affects the conservation of those animals? Because people, if they, as bad as it sounds, if you can't bring a trophy back, or quote unquote trophy back, a memory piece, as I like to call it, you can't bring that back. It's going to stop people from going over there and doing it. So how do you feel that affects the conservation over there?
It's catastrophic. And so to give you an idea, I was at a Safari Club International generated meeting, but it was a meeting, it was in Maputo, Mozambique several years ago. And I was one of the folks writing articles about it. And what it was a gathering of government leaders who were in their, whatever you want to call it, wildlife departments. They were the ministers of wildlife from all these different Southern African, in particular, countries. And their viewpoint, these are like Kenyans, or not Kenyans, Tanzanians, or the Mozambique representative, or whoever it was, Namibian. And so they're all Black Africans. And all of these folks said, this is catastrophic. They told the U.S. Fish and Wildlife woman who was there, this is catastrophic. This is going to lead to the extinction of these animals because they have no value for us. Now, some of your listeners may ask, well, why do you need the trophy? Well, the trophy has been called a totem. It's by some folks, it's been called, I call it a memory maker. And it is just a brief glimpse brings back to my memory those days in the natural system where I was actually in touch with nature to a greater degree than anyone who just goes out there and backpacks, or I call it backpacking, hikes. And I can say that because I'm an inveterate backpacker. I love doing it. But you go out hunting and your senses are more aware, et cetera, and you're really more in contact with the natural world than you'll ever be in any other sense of the word, and any other way. The trophy, regardless, the trophy is recognized as a major part of bringing that back. Is it everything? Of course it's not. don't lop the heads off like some anti-hunters claim we do, and just take the skins and leave the body to rot. We just don't do that. The meat is a huge resource in any developing country or any country whatsoever. You and I have already talked about that. But the trophy is a special thing. I am not ashamed to say I'm a trophy hunter, because I also know what goes into that as a biologist. So I can tell you that the leaders in these countries, in terms of conservation, they are saying this is catastrophic. A good example of it are Bonte bucks in South Africa. They were brought back from extinction. There's this beautiful purple-shouldered antelope, if folks don't know what they are. And they're very closely related to what's called a blesbok, which is less colorful. But the Bonte bucks were specifically brought back from extinction because, quote-unquote, trophy hunters wanted to have this beautiful trophy with this purple hue on it and all this in their rooms. Then in the U.S., Fish and Wildlife put a ban on the importation. And what happened was in South Africa in particular is that they were harvested, that the outfitters said, okay, they're costly, they're eating the plants, they're competing with the animals that can be imported, and they called them. They were getting, $12,000 an animal or whatever it was before. Then they were going for nothing. So they called them and they dropped back down in numbers. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife person, I remember her answer, well, y'all shouldn't be doing that. And the guy said, then you need to let them come back into the U.S. And believe it or not, they lifted it. They lifted the ban and the price went back up and the animals increased. So trophy hunting is an incredible advantage for any species, because remember, only a few and only the mature males are going to be harvested. Those are the trophies for most species. And so you're talking about in Catata 11, they had 1,200 Cape buffaloes in that area at the end of the Civil War. They now have over 40,000 in that area, and they harvest, I don't know, 120 bulls a year, mature bulls. Now, that's what everybody needs to realize too when we talk about quote unquote trophy hunting. It's a very small percentage of the population is being harvested, and every bit of that money goes back in for conservation and community outreach. So,
no, that's an awesome answer, and it's great to have someone with your background on just everything: conservation, biology, hunting Africa. You've been there, I've had guides on, I've had people that have hunted Africa and we've spoken about it, and everything I've learned from listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos. I'm not much of a reader myself. I'm dyslexic, so I get lost in a book, but not the way everyone else does. It's me stuttering on words.
I get it.
But yeah, it's awesome to hear. It's something here that people have struggled with, especially, bringing stuff back. You seen with like when Cecil the lion was shot, they put the import ban of lions straight away, and it just, they ended up killing more lions because the populations got out of control. The rangers had to go out there and do it. So there's always a downfall.
Exactly. And the thing about it is it's a carry on. If I can just mention, like with lions, let's just take lions or apex predators like that. In Africa, when the locals want to get rid of lions, they use poison. They poison baits, some animal that's died or has been killed by the lion, a cow or whatever. The lion then is not, in all honesty, the main thing or the apex predator is not the main organism that's impacted by that. There's been a 50% reduction in the vultures in the vulturine-like things, those animals, those birds that feed off of carcasses. And a lot of it has to do with that poisoning. It has to do with some other things too, but a lot of it's that. So you have this cascade of events when you don't have value. That lion would not be poisoned if it was worth the 160, believe it or not, we pay $160,000 for a lion to go hunt a lion, at least. Okay, it's probably more than that now. So when you pump that kind of money in there, the farmer is going to say, it's okay. You can kill the occasional cow. Okay. We're going to keep the females around with the cubs. They can kill the occasional animal. It really is all right. We can wear that economically. It's not going to decimate my family to lose that cow because all of this income coming in. But when you put a ban on that, first of all, I think it's just ignorant when countries do that. Developed countries, quote unquote, do that. But also, we're not thinking, okay, what is it really going to do? If you're really against the death of those animals, you are promoting the death of many more of those animals. You're going to get the cubs wiped out. You're going to get the females wiped out. You're going to get the males wiped out because the locals are not going to put up with that. They're just not. They can't, because it'll destroy them economically, physically, everything else. They're going to get rid of the animals because there's no, look, it sounds crass, but if it pays, it stays. And it just is a fact. And, people either can be adults about this or they cannot be. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's a lot of people that can't be adults about it, and that's where the issue comes from.
Well, it's still dialogue.
So you've been around the place, you've hunted a lot of incredible animals and places. Do you still have a top 5 dream animals that you haven't gone and hunted yet? Is it the animals themselves, or is it the places that they're in that you would want to go to?
It really is a both and sort of situation. I love different cultures. I love visiting different cultures. As a professor, speaking in various places over the years, invitations to go. I've gone to 32 countries and different places and given talks or taught short courses in my topic area. And I love seeing different cultures. I mean, we lived in Australia for 6 years. If we could put up with the for 6, oh, wow, I'm on an Australian podcast. Never mind. But no, so both of our kids were born there. I want to emphasize that. But we love different, Francis and I both love natural environments that are different to us. Being in the Scottish Highlands for the first time, we'd been in Scotland a number of times, but being in the Highlands, it was devastatingly beautiful, if you can allow that kind of mixed smash of words. But it was so cool, and we loved that. Okay, I'll tell you, a couple of my top ones happen in the Northern Territory, and I have never hunted in the Northern Territory. I'm not begging for an invitation. I'm just saying that, being in that area, I would love to experience that. I've been up to, the farthest I've been is Darwin, on the eastern part. So I've actually never been in the NT in Northern Territory, and so I'd like to do that. I would like to hunt in France. I would love to go there and hunt, the antelope and that sort of thing. And so that's there. I really someday would like, I like tiny stuff. So I'm not as interested. I love hunting cats. So I would love to go over and hunt some of the African felids. Someone asked me one time, so you'd really love to hunt because I've hunted a leopard, love to hunt a lion. And I said, it's odd. It'd be fine, but I don't have this burning desire to hunt a lion, but I'd love to get their lynx. I'd love to, there's these little things. I've hunted bobcats here in the US. So I'm really, those are bucket list, I guess, for me, as well as some more small stuff over in Africa. But it's really the adventures. It's seeing new country.
Yeah.
As a biologist, one of my most fascinating discoveries in Cameroon when I hunted there was not, I got a red buffalo, West African savanna buffalo, and I wanted one. I wrote an article for Sportsfield called "Buffalo as Red as My Hair." So I wanted a red buffalo. But one of the most fascinating things, and my guide, my PH, couldn't believe it. I was on my hands and knees crawling around in the dirt, photographing these little termite mounds. I thought they were the coolest things in the world. He said, "You really are weird." And I said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "We can't hunt those. Those aren't on permit." He was giving me a hard time. I said, "Yeah, okay, I won't shoot at it." But it's that sort of thing, as a biologist and as also probably somebody who's, wanted to be an anthropologist, I guess. I love talking to people about how they live and seeing how they live. I don't know.
No, I can 100% relate to you on that. And yeah, speaking of how you like hunting small stuff and cats, we'll have to get you down here on some feral cats. They'll be an eye opener for you.
There you go. I'm happy. The funny thing is, I'm a cat person. I had a cat for 16 years here, was my pet. I swore as big as he got, I was going to put him up in one of these pine trees around here, bait him into it, and shoot him out of it before I got my leopard. So, but anyway, I'm a cat person. I really love them. But I love hunting. I really love hunting.
Oh, they're a crafty little critter, especially fun to bow hunt in, especially when you call them in like you do with any other predators. Predator bow hunting here is good fun. You get onto cats. Like you speak to the old school bow hunters who were, trad through and through, who bow hunted during the rabbit plague down here. They'd sit off a warren and they'd shoot 60, 70 odd rabbits with the bows, and then they'd shoot the cats that came in and the foxes that came in to eat the rabbits off of the warrens. And, they've got...
Oh, wow.
It's pretty cool. But yeah, no, I can definitely relate to you on, it's not just the places and the animals, but it's the people too. I haven't gone to as many countries as you. I've been to New Zealand, Texas, and Mexico hunting, but still just experiencing the different cultures and meeting new people and chatting hunting. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, I'd like to go to New Zealand and hunt a tahr, and sometime I'd that really is a bucket list animal. I got to do it while I can still climb the darn hills. I may be past that, but I'm sure one of those really strong Kiwi guides can lug me up a hill on his shoulders.
Oh, trust me, those hills suck. I was fortunate I got a tahr for my 30th, but being from flatland Australia, those hills are no joke. But you find yourself a big Maori fella, I'm sure he'd carry you up those hills no problem, and he'd have a can of Jack Daniels in one hand and a cigarette hanging out his mouth as he's doing it.
There you go.
What would be your favorite thing to cook with wild game?
Meat wise, if you're talking about meat, there are two animals that I love the best that I've eaten several times. That's eland from Africa, obviously, and then moose from North America. I love all kinds of wild game meat, but those are my two sort of big game animals. The kind of, now my age, I grew up with everything being what we call in the South chicken fried. So all that means is that we take, what is it, the quote that I've heard, we take any meat and we fry it like it's chicken. But so it's just basically floured and fried in grease. And I absolutely, someone said that'll kill you. And I said, yeah, but I'm going to die with a smile on my face. So we do a lot of ours cooking like that. I do also, though, a lot of Indian cooking, a lot of curries, and I do a lot of Italian. And any of the game meats, good cuts, work really, really well with those cuisines, obviously. And so, those are my two favorite meats in the world in terms of big game animals. Now, I also love a lot of birds, anything with white meat on it, pheasant, quail, that sort of thing. And we grew up eating rabbits, squirrels, everything else here. So.
Yeah, that's one of my go-to. Speaking of chicken fried stuff, I love Kentucky frying rabbit. I cut it off all the bones and make little popcorn rabbit nuggets out of it. The kids love it. I love it. And it's a hitter for anyone that hasn't had any wild game before. But, for dinner tonight, I cooked a samba deer spaghetti bolognese. And last night we had samba deer schnitzels. So it's I can relate. We call them schnitzels. You call them chicken fried.
Yeah, so sambar is good.
Samba's really good, yeah, really good. They're the third largest deer species in the world, and we have a beautiful population of them here down in Victoria, and you can hunt them free range. There's a bunch of public land that you can just park up and go hunt. You just need your hunting permit. There's no tags. You can shoot as many hinds or as many stags as you want if you can find them.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is very good.
So when you do your Australia trip, I'll send you the links for the hog deer ballot. So when you draw that, then you can go from a hog deer to go shoot a samba in the same area.
Oh man, I'm salivating here. That's my problem. I shouldn't be doing that. If my wife was here, she'd be cutting into this and saying, "Leave him alone. He doesn't need somewhere else to go."
See, I'm horrible. I like to encourage people to just go do it.
There you go. I like the way you think.
I had a mate, a fella that contacted me through Facebook about 2 years ago. He came down this year just after the rut from Maine. So he flew down and spent a couple of weeks down here, and we got him onto fallow deer and a bunch of small game out spotlighting. He was blown away shooting a deer under a spotlight. That was very, very impressive for him.
Yep. They call it lamping, and I don't know what y'all call it actually, spotlighting, I guess, but they call it lamping in Africa. It's how I got one of my little guys, the Cape Griesbach, was lamping, and I said, it was my very first. I was like, "Your friend from Maine, is this legal?" And he said, "Yeah, it's legal. Of course it is. We wouldn't have you shooting something." Really? And I said, "Okay, just checking."
Yeah, no, he's like, "This is the most illegal thing I've ever felt like I've been doing." It's good fun. Like we're very lucky, and that's what I like to convince every American that I speak to that hunts to come down here and check it out, because we do have that 28 different species that you can hunt, and the only one that you really need tags for is the hog deer in Victoria. Fallow deer in Tasmania you also need tags for, and seasons, but you can hunt them anywhere else in Australia without tags or seasons, which is pretty cool. But we've got camels, wild dogs, everything. Lots of cool weird stuff. But we're coming to the end of the podcast now. We've pretty much discussed two of my major talking points already, which is awesome. So we'll jump straight into the big last question that I love. What is hunting to you?
Well, hunting to me is conservation. There's a couple of things that I think about when I'm looking for an outfitter. Maybe that's the best way to, and a place to go hunt. Maybe that's the best way to answer this, I think, for me. If I was going to look for a new, or when I look for a new outfitter, and Sportsfield actually asked me to an article about this a few years ago. How do you find a conscientious, conservation minded outfitter and one who's interested in improving the surrounding community, depending on what that looks like, where they are, like we've talked about. So hunting for me is the sport, and I love to use the term sport, and once again that's a buzzword over here, big red button for a lot of folks, but to me it's a sport that I'm passionate about, that brings value and brings improvement both to habitats and to people's lives. And that's what hunting is. It did when I was a 5-year-old. It brought a sense of community to me as a child. It brought me into a community of passionate sportsmen and women who pursued their sport because they knew that it was actually improving their natural environment that they were in, and it was improving the local community, whatever that looked like for them, whether it was building in new jobs, whether it was helping people go to school, whatever it happened to be from income. So that's still what hunting is for me. It's this community of folks who are dedicated, and the outfitters who I look for are those who are dedicated to those two main goals, which are conservation and the uplift of human, the improvement of the quality of life of humans in the area where I'm hunting. That's what I see as hunting, and it just always will be, and all that goes along with that of getting into nature is just a part of that passion for me. So.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, people that listen to the podcast will be sick of me saying it, but I just love hearing everyone's own words on what hunting is to them. And like I said to you before we started recording, it's something that I can relate to pretty much everyone how they put it. I'm just like, oh, that's another great way of putting it. So yeah, it's awesome. I love it. Awesome. So for people that have enjoyed the conversation, they want to see more about what you've done. They want to get a hold of some of your books and have a read. I've got a good biologist mate, Dan, that will probably be interested in reading your first 4 books, because he's an absolute conservation biologist nerd, which is great. I love him. Frustrating as hell sometimes, but especially on the pest side of things and the introduced species side. Me and him go back and forth all the time, but I'm sure he would absolutely love to read the work that you've put out. So where can people like him and people that want to get hold of your books go find this stuff?
Well, they can go to mikearnoldoutdoors.com. That's my website. And they'll find there the 2 books listed now, the last 2 books that we've been discussing, Bringing Back the Lions and Bringing Back the Wild. There'll be a link there. The way that Aussies, the easiest way for y'all to get a hold of them, unless you're coming to a show in the U.S., if you're coming to one of the conventions like Dallas Safari Club or Safari Club International or whatever, I'll be there signing books and that sort of thing. But the best way for them to get a copy of those books is just to go to Amazon, and Amazon Australia has them both, and you can just order them there and get them to your house quickly. If they want to contact me via email, they can do it at mike@mikearnoldoutdoors.com, but they'll see that also as well on my website. But the website will show them. We're actually talking to a website designer in, 3 hours from now. And so we're going to be working on that and reconstructing the website, but it's still there. And so they can get on and see some of the things we've done and what's happened recently. And hopefully it'll excite them a little bit about hunting and conservation and that sort of thing.
100% sure it will. Checked out the website today again just to refresh my mind on everything, and it's easy to work around. And on the website, if you're buying stuff through there, it's got the different countries to click on for the Amazon in specific, so it's all there. And I'll chuck everything in the post when this comes out in a few weeks' time. So, but I really appreciate you coming on, and it's been an awesome chat. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. And we'll have to get you down here one day and get you onto some critters down here.
Well, thank you so much, and don't worry, I will make it back to Oz sometime soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on, and we'll chat again soon. Catch you later. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Hunting Connection Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained valuable insights into the world of hunting, fishing, and the outdoors. To stay connected with us and never miss out on an update, please be sure to follow us on social media, all at Hunting Connection Podcast. We appreciate your support and would love for you to share the podcast with your friends and family. Don't forget to tag us in your hunting photos on social media and let us know about your experiences. Your feedback is invaluable to us, so please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Together, we continue growing and delivering more captivating episodes for all hunting enthusiasts. Stay connected, stay informed, and keep pursuing your passion for the hunt. Until next time, happy hunting.